We're going to be having a look at system variables today, explaining what they are, and so we'll just get started. So system variables are settings that control how certain commands work. When you mirror text, there's a system variable that's set to be able to mirror the text, whether it stays the way it is or whether it mirrors. And so that's a subcommand of the mirror command for the text. So there's all these little system variables in here that have little tools that add little bits and pieces to your commands at the moment. You can see on screen at the moment, there's over 870 system variables in AutoCAD 2022. Many more if we go into Civil 3D or MAP or any of those. The basic system variables that are in AutoCAD 2022 are generally the same as what they are in BricsCAD. So if you're using BricsCAD rather than AutoCAD, this class should help you as well. So it should be interchangeable between BricsCAD and AutoCAD. So there's some sample system variables on screen here at the moment. We've got visRetain here. It's set to 1, thumb save set to 1. We don't necessarily know what all these system variables are, and being almost 900 of them, we don't expect you to know all of them. However, there are some crucial ones that can actually improve your performance or AutoCAD's performance. So we can actually speed up regenerations and opening of files, closing of files, and things like that with a few system variables. We'll also look at some system variables that actually help you speed up your drafting. But AutoCAD commands reference system variables to establish defaults. So with your hatching, there's system variables that control how big a gap you can allow in a boundary, so the boundaries don't have to be closed. They can control your drafting environment. From AutoCAD session to session, those system variables are stored in a registry. So when we're having a look at the system variables, if it states that it's stored in a registry, generally those settings go from session to session with AutoCAD. Then we have system variables that are stored in a drawing, and those are specific for the individual drawing that has been set in. So those settings will not go through to other drawings. If you need those system variables to be set in particular drawings, I would suggest adding them to your template and have them set how you want. Yeah, for the ones that are in a drawing, set them in a template and apply that template when you start a drawing, or set those you'll have to set those variables every time you start a new drawing. Once the variables have been set in a drawing, they will stay as they are set for the entire life of the drawing. If you W block the drawing out, those system variables will go with that drawing when they're exported. So if you have, there's some system variables about drawing scales, whether the drawing's set to meters or millimeters or things like that. When you export the files out from AutoCAD, those variables will go with it, so they know that when you import them into another drawing, they're set at certain scale factors and things like that. So we'll just move on to the next slide. System variables have 4 different types of responses. When we have a look at the system variable editor, which is a bonus tool in AutoCAD, you'll see that they specify there's integer, string, real, and bit code. Integers are whole numbers. So when it's after an integer, you cannot have a decimal place in the number. It has to be a whole number. So 1, 2, 1,000, 3,000, that sort of thing. A string is just a sequence of characters. A string is, you might have a template directory that's set, and you would have the complete folded structure, and that would be classed as a string. So it would go C:\/ program files / so on and so forth. It would actually place that whole length of your drawing location or whatever it may be as a string. So a string can include any characters, your normal characters, and any numbers. There are restrictions on, the normal Windows characters that you cannot use in strings, but generally, if you're just using plain English, For a string, you'll have no issue. The next one is a real number. A real number can be a whole number when you're entering it into AutoCAD. If you enter it as an integer, it will be converted to a real number by putting a decimal 0 on the end, or depending upon your precision of that variable. So they can be either positive or negative numbers, and it can be any number that it may be. There may be a group of numbers. So, if you're putting in coordinates, with coordinates, when you're entering coordinates, that'll go in as a string. So it'll be 0, 0, 0, and that would be a string. That they wouldn't be classed as a real number or an integer. The fourth option is bit code. The bit code options with system variables can be a bit confusing. With a bit code, you add all the options together that are available, and the total of those options are what will be set for the tool or the variable that you're setting. So as it says here, the option values are added together to specify a unique combination of behaviors. For example, the lock UI system variable, it's got the following 5 bit codes available. It's got 0, toolbars, panels, and windows are not locked. So if lock UI is set to 0, you'll be able to move all your panels and windows around. If you set it to 1, you would have docked toolbars and panels locked. If you set it to 2, you'd have docked or anchored windows locked, and so on and so forth. However, if you were to add, say you wanted the docked toolbars and panels locked, and you would also want the floating toolbars and panels locked, you would add the bit codes on the left-hand side. So that would be 1 for docked toolbars and panels, and that would be 4 for floating toolbars. So you would add those together. So that would be 5. 4 plus 1 is 5. So if we have a look down the bottom here, if it's set to 5, that is 1 plus 4 equals 5. Only docked and floating toolbars are locked. Docked, anchored, and floating windows are not locked. So you can have any combination here. The way it's set up, you cannot, they add up to separate numbers. You cannot have duplicate numbers, and it will calculate what settings are applied. The OSNAP variable in AutoCAD, it has multiple entries. So it's got many more entries, and we'll have a look at that one a little bit later in the session just to show you how it works. So that's the 4 types. We've got integer, we've got string, we've got real, and we've got bit code. When you go to the help file with AutoCAD, it will tell you what type of entry is requested or required for the system variable. There is also a tool in AutoCAD that's part of the system variable, part of the Express tools called SYSVDLG, and that gives us easy access to system variables. It provides a dialog box with all the variables in there, and it provides the information that you need to be able to enter the variables that you want. There's also the old way of managing your variables by using the AutoCAD setvar command. With a lot of variables, the variables can be entered at the command line. However, some of the variables cannot be entered at the command line, and you would need to use setvar and then search for the variable and set that variable in there. AutoCAD recently, in the last 2 or 3 versions, have introduced a thing called the System Variable Monitor, which is, the command is on screen, SYSVAR Monitor. This tool runs continually in AutoCAD, and it states when a system variable has been changed. So you may have certain system variables that you want to stay at the same setting as what you have now. You might have the variable that displays your file dialogues to be able to select folders and drawings and things like that. Sometimes that comes up at the command line rather than with the dialog box. We can actually add that variable into the system variable monitor, and if it gets changed to command line, you'll get a warning and you'll be able to set that setting back. So once you know your variables, you can add them to the system variable monitor. And if they change from your preferred settings, you'll be notified and you'll be able to change those settings back.
Selwyn?
Yes.
Can I just ask a question in regards to that?
Yes.
The system variable monitor, what would be an example of why a system variable might change without your actual input?
You
Would
may
it be Lisp routines and things, or?
Yeah, it could change, or with Lisp routines, it could actually change with the template that you're loading. You may be loading a template that doesn't have the same settings as what you're after. So you could go through and verify that the settings that are coming through on the template are the ones you want.
Yep.
Or you can reset them. Or you may actually, with the selection modes in AutoCAD, you might have pick first set, so you can select objects, and sometimes that, I'm not sure what changes it, but pick first is one of those variables that seems to get changed with some of the code that gets run in AutoCAD, and you would be alerted that that variable was changed.
Great, thank you.
I'd recommend placing the ones that you rely on yourself, to be placed in the system variable monitor, and then you'll be able to see if it gets changed. And then you can reset it to to your preferred setting if you want, and it's easily done in that system variable monitor.
Thank you. Great.
Okay, so the next stage is to go through some of the system variables that we have. We're going to look at performance first. We've got a list of variables here. We've got performance, selection, drafting, display, layer control, insert, and export. We'll have a look at the performance variables first. With thread, actually, we'll go to AutoCAD first, and we'll have a look at the tools that we have in AutoCAD to set these, and then we'll have a look at how we do that. Okay, so with AutoCAD, we have set var. So if I was to type set var at the command line, this is the old way of managing our variables. And us old command line users, this is probably the way that we'll go in and do it because we're used to doing it this way. But if I type set var at the command line, press enter, it asks me for a variable name or question mark. If I was to enter a variable name, I'll type OS mode. I know OS mode is the snap modes. Sorry, I don't know. Hold on. I've just lost my command line. I'll just bring that back here. So OS mode controls these settings in here. So if I was to go set var, OS mode, you'll see that it's set to 4215. OS mode is a bit code entry. If I set it to 0, it will turn all snap modes off. So now when I go back into my snap here, we'll see that none of these settings are applied anymore because I've set snap mode back to 0. If I was to change it back to 4215, we go back into our snap modes and those settings are back where they are. Sorry, back how they were previously. So I'm just going to bring up the help file for OS mode. And we'll see here. Hold on, we don't see in here. I'll just type OS mode here. System variable. If we have a look in here, we'll see that we have 0 for none. So when I set OS mode to 0, it's set to none. If I set it to 1, I'll just take this over here, it'll set it to endpoint. So 1, if we come back over into the OSNAP modes, it should only be set to endpoint. If I wanted endpoint and midpoint, I would add 1 to 2, which makes 3. And if I set it to 3, that would be my OS mode, which would be endpoint and midpoint. So I'll just go 3. And if we have a look back at OS mode over here, we'll have endpoint and midpoint set. So you can enter a system variable here by using the set var command. And you can enter the name here, or if we press a question mark, it will actually scroll through and it will list the variables that you want. If we leave it at the asterisk, it will list everything. If we did dim with an asterisk, it will show all the system variables that start with dim. So you could go through, and if we have a look at all the dim variables in here, you'll see that there's actually quite a few in here, and they're all the dimension variables. So there's loads of dimension variables that are set when we create a dimension style, and this is how they're all saved. They're saved as variables, and when we run a dimension command, it looks up all the settings that are in the system variables that are referred to in the dimension style. So if we come back to set var once again, we'll just go question mark, and if I do asterisk, we'll see we'll have page after page after page of system variables. So there are a lot of system variables. As I said, almost 800, I think it was 800 or 900. So there are a lot in here, but if you go into Civil 3D, you'll have even more. We don't expect you to know all the system variables. However, after today, I hope that you'll get to know some of the ones that I think will help you out with your work. On the Express tools, which are generally installed by default with the later versions of AutoCAD, older versions of AutoCAD, it was a separate application that had to be installed. If you don't have the Express Tools menu displayed and it's been installed, you just type Express Tools at the command line and it will display the Express Tools menu. So on the Express Tools, we come over here to Tools and we'll see here there is a entry here that says System Variable Editor. This is the sysvdlg application that I spoke of earlier. If we click on here, we'll actually see that we have, I'll get rid of that. So this is all the variables in AutoCAD. So if I have a look at, I'll come down to OS mode. I'll just do OS with an asterisk and it should show me here. So OS mode, you'll see here it's set to 3. We set it just before. So we used endpoint and midpoint. So we added those together. And it's telling us that the setting up here is 3 and the current setting is 3. The initial value when we came into the drawing was 4133. So we've actually modified that from the default settings. It's stating that it's saved in the registry. So when you open another drawing, those same settings, the snap mode settings will be the same when you open the next drawing, or any drawing from now on, until you change that snap mode setting up here. You'll see down the bottom here that it says it sets running object snaps, and the setting is stored as a bit code using the sum of the values, of the following values. So, you know, we add those together and we get a number, and that's what we enter up here. I did the easy arithmetic of 1 plus 2, which is 3. But as you saw before, you know, you can have a high number. And if we were to add them all together, you know, it's going to be a really large number. But AutoCAD knows that if 3 is able to go into this number, it will set the midpoint and endpoint. Same with all the other variables in here. They're all listed. And you'll see that some of them are not saved and some of them are read-only. The read-only ones are unable to be modified. So, you know, the PK serial number, that's a serial number for AutoCAD. We don't use that one anymore, although it still refers to a serial number in here. And you're unable to change this. It's 0, it's like in the old days, 0-0 if you were using a network license. However, these days it states that if you're using a user login. So we can go through, we have a look at all these entries down here. And, you know, we get here, you know, this one's saved in registry, integer, so it's only a 0 or a 1 it's expecting. If we have a look at, hold on, I'll just go back to AutoCAD path. AutoCAD prefix, sorry. You'll see in here that this is a string. So it's got the C colon backslash, goes through the folders. It's separating the paths with a semicolon, and then it's got more folders. The AutoCAD prefix is the setting that AutoCAD looks at when it's searching for its default folders. So that's probably enough on the system variables. If you want to narrow it down, like I did before with the dimension variables, just type dim and a asterisk at the end, and that will list all your dim settings. So you can come in here, you can change any of these settings in here if you want, and that's probably the easiest way of changing them is using this system variables editor. You'll also notice on the screen down the bottom here, we have read, which will allow you to read in the system variables from a file that has been exported previously. And to export the system variables, if we just change this back to the default, if I click on Save All, that will write it out to a file, and that file can be shared with others or can be brought back into your system if you want. So Save All will save the system variables to a file. Read will read a system variable file in. Okay, we'll save the settings that you've modified in here, and cancel will just cancel out. So down here, I'm just going to change a system variable. I'll just change it to 0. And we should see down, hold on, it hasn't actually appeared. The system variable monitor here, we can see if we open that one up, you see my pick first preferred setting is 1, but I've changed it to 0. So it's got a warning sign here or a status sign here stating that it's different than my preferred. If I want to reset it, all I need to do is to click on this and it will reset the variables that I want back to my standard settings. I've got, we'll have a look at CMDIA and FileDIA in a short while, but I've got those ones in there because if they change, we want to set them back to what they were. We also have up the top here, we can notify when the system variables change, and we can actually enable a balloon notification. So if I have the balloon notification on, I'll change the pick first setting once more. I'll change it back to 0. And now you'll see down the bottom here, it says system variable changed. One of the monitor system variables has been changed from preferred value. Click to view the change, and that will bring up the system variable monitor. The system variable monitor isn't anywhere on the menu or on the ribbons. Same with setvar, it's not on the ribbon or menus either. So we click on reset all. Okay, and my variables are set to my preferred variable settings that I want. Okay, so we might just move on to the actual tools that will help us speed up our performance. So we're going to have a look at the performance column here. We'll have a look at whip thread, tool tips, rollover tips, p-edit accept, RT Regen auto, layout Regen control, selection preview, 3D tech preview, and iSave % initially. So I'm just going to bring AutoCAD back up on screen. And I'm just going to work through each of these. The first one I mentioned was whip thread. We may as well bring up the variable monitor while we're doing this. So whip thread, it controls whether to use an additional processor. So most PCs these days have multiple processors on their system. So if you were to change the whip thread setting to 1, it allows multi-processors to be used for certain objects, certain things in your AutoCAD, mainly regens. So changing whip thread to 1 will change the regen speed, and it should actually decrease the time it takes to regenerate on larger drawings. Smaller drawings, you won't notice it. And so my default value here is 1, and it's telling you what it's expecting down here. And as you can see, it's saved in the registry. So that setting will be saved for every session of AutoCAD until I change that setting once more. So now that I've got it set to 1, whenever I open AutoCAD, whip thread will be set to 1. The next one that we were looking at was tooltips. Tooltips are when we hover over a ribbon, we get the pop-out that comes and displays what that tool does. You'll find in larger drawings that if that is set to on, larger drawings will take longer to display and to pan around and do its stuff. And then when you hover over the ribbon, it's going to take longer to display that. So once you become familiar with AutoCAD, or you're comfortable without tooltips, I would suggest turning off the display of tooltips. You can always click on a command and press F1 to get the additional information if you do need that. However, to speed things up, I would suggest turning off the display of tooltips. Same with rollover tips. That's when you hover over an object in AutoCAD, and when we hover over, that will take a moment. Sorry, when we hover over, we get this display on screen here. That with larger drawings, even with smaller drawings, you see the delay it takes even in this small drawing to display that rollover tip. I would suggest removing the rollover tips if you can get by without them. Generally, with larger drawings, we'll turn those off, and we'll find that, as we're panning around, we're not going to get the delays when it thinks it's got an object underneath the cursor, and it'll be able to move on, and you won't get as much staggered movement of the mouse with that one turned off. P-edit accept is the next one that we have. We'll just do it at the command line. This one, if I draw a line, draw multiple lines, I'll draw another one. We convert these to polylines. So if I type p-edit accept, and I'll set to 0. Now when I use the p-edit command, P-E-D-I-T, select the polyline, it's going to ask me if I want to turn it into a polyline, and I have to answer yes, and then continue doing my work. If I have the p-edit accept system variable set to 1, if I use the p-edit command, click on a line up here, I don't get that prompt anymore to convert it to a polyline. So if you've got multiple polylines in your working on multiple lines or converting things to polylines, that'll speed up your operation of converting your polylines. Not a biggie, but it can help you out at times, and it's probably more a drafting tool than a speed tool, I'd say, for this one. The next entry that I was going to look at was RT Regen Auto. So RT is real time, Regen Auto. What this does, hold on, if I had of, when you're panning around or zooming in AutoCAD, when you get to a part of the drawing that hasn't been placed into memory, AutoCAD automatically creates or automatically regenerates the drawing. You can tell it not to regenerate, and so if you've got a large drawing, it won't regenerate the stuff that hasn't been loaded into memory. So if you're going into an area of your drawing that wasn't regenerated, it will not regenerate, and you would have to type regen yourself to get that to regenerate. If you're doing a lot of panning in that, and it's asking you to regenerate quite often, I would suggest turning off the real-time Regen Auto command. The next one that I'll look at is layout regen control. CTL. And this is to do with the display list and how it is stored. When you go from model space to paper space, we regenerate that first time coming into paper space. However, we may not need to regenerate each time we go into paper space or into model space, depending upon what's being done in either of those spaces. We can actually turn off the regeneration of our drawings when we go from layout to model. And if we do need to regenerate, we type regen. And I would suggest changing this setting to be number 2. So it's regenerated the first time you switch to each tab. And for the remainder of the drawing, list, the display list is saved to memory, and regenerations are suppressed when you switch those tabs. So if you're finding you're going from model space to paper space and it's regenerating, set this one to 2, and you'll find you'll be able to toggle between layouts and back to model space fairly rapidly, except for the first time when you go into a layout or the first time you go into model space, it will have to regenerate that layout. But once it's been regenerated, it's stored in memory, and then it will just switch and do a redraw rather than a regen when it redisplays that layout. You'll notice that most of these entries are registry entries. So these ones that I'm going through at the moment, they're saved to registry. So they're set for AutoCAD for whenever it starts up. The next system variable, selection preview. When you highlight or hover over an item, the item can highlight, sometimes with a larger drawing, or most of the times with a larger drawing, to highlight the objects. That will take time. If you have your pick box and your Aperture and different drafting tools set quite well, you probably won't need the display of the selection. So selection preview, so turn it off. So it won't highlight any of the objects when you click on them. On when no commands are active. So when you hover over or move your cursor around, it tries to highlight objects. I'd suggest leaving that off and only having it on for when a command prompts for object selection. So either 2 or 0. I wouldn't leave it as 3. It's a bit code. It doesn't actually say it's a bit code entry here, but it's set to 3. So it's going to be on when no commands are active, and it's also on when a command prompts for object selection. So as I said, I would leave it off, or I would set it at 2. An introduced command in 2022, all AutoCAD variants, is 3D Tech Preview. Oops, sorry. This is a new system variable in AutoCAD 2022. Autodesk are trying a new method of regenerating and controlling the display of the objects in AutoCAD. So it's new, it's turned off by default. So whenever you go into your AutoCAD, it's going to be off by default. However, if you turn it on, set it to 1, you'll find that you'll be able to, the regenerations and different operating commands will be using additional cores for your processing rather than a single core. This isn't a tool that's actually it's one of these ones, use at your own risk sort of thing, but it is in there. It's worth trying just to see if that can speed up your regenerations, your selections, and any of that sort of stuff in there. So 3D Tech Preview, worth having a look at. You might find a difference with your plotting, with different things if you enable that one. So I would suggest to increase or decrease the time lags and things in AutoCAD, set it to 1 and see how you go with that one. The next one we'll be looking at is iSave%. When AutoCAD is saving a drawing, it uses the iSave% command or system variable. At the moment, it's set to 50%. With iSave%, AutoCAD will do a quick save until the file has 50% of unused information in the file. So it's just quicker it tacks the current saves onto the end of the file and leaves the redundant stuff in the file. So when you are saving, it'll be faster. If we were to set it to 100, it will save into your drawing, and your drawing could become twice the size. So if you've got a 2 gig drawing, it could become a 4 gig drawing. And then when it gets to that size, twice the size of what it is, it will do a full save and save it back down to the 2 gig or thereabouts. If it's set to 0, every save in AutoCAD will be a full save. So there'll be no partial saves of your drawing, and your files will stay at the smallest size they can. Full saves take longer than partial saves. So it really depends on your drawing, whether you want it set at a higher value or a lower value. With a larger drawing, you're probably better off leaving it at a higher figure, although the full save will take longer. Ultimately, with the partial saves happening with a large drawing, that there'll be less impact whilst you're working. But when it comes to do the full save will take some time. Not unbearably so, but the normal time it would take to save like a 2 gig drawing or something like that, if it's a 2 gig drawing. Another one that could be handy as well is BG Core Publish. What this one is when you're background plotting, background publishing, we can use a single core or multiple cores for background publishing. If it's set to 1, you'll be using multiple cores for your background publishing rather than a single core. And that's how it was in 2021. So this is new in 2022, and it allows you to publish in the background using multiple cores. To be using this one here, you will also need your background plot to be set to 2 or 3. We'll just have a look at that one. So we would set it at 2 or 3. So publish for background and background. Those two would need to be set for BG Core Publish to function. So that's our speed entries we've gone through here. Are there any questions, Jonathan, on that component?
No, not specifically around what you've been showing there. I like the fact you snuck in an extra one at the end there that wasn't on your list, which was nice.
I know. Oh, yes.
Little bonus yes. Performance variable. Love it.
Okay. So we'll go back to AutoCAD now. We're going to go through and have a look at the selection options here. We'll look at Aperture, AP Box, which is Aperture Box. We'll look at Pick Box, and we'll look at Pick First. There are additional selection tools, but these ones I feel are the ones that are going to help, or I find that are good ones for me. So Aperture, I've just got to get back here. So when we snapping to something, so we do a line and we snap to an object, there's a tolerance around the point that it's going to snap to, and that is called the aperture. So if we have a look at the aperture now, I'll just type aperture, and it's set to 5. If I set it, I'll set it to a large number. I'll set it to 50. I'll do line once more. And you'll see that now I'm a distance away from that line and it's actually snapping to it. That's because my aperture is set to 50. I can't see, it'd be nice to see, the enclosed area that the aperture is set to, and that's where we come to AP box. If we set the variable AP box, I'll go back in the variable editor. It's probably the easiest way. I'll just go back to aperture initially. So controls the size of the object target box. So 50 is the largest. I've got it set at 50. What we need to have a look at now is AP box, and that will actually place a box on screen the size of our aperture. So I'm just going to turn that one on. I'll change it to 1. And if I click OK, if I draw a line now, I can actually see the aperture box on screen. So that's how big my aperture is set in this drawing. So I can see in here, it's quite large. If I change the aperture back to a smaller figure, I'll go to 5. Sorry, I'll go to 10, just a bit larger. Draw a line, and you can see that box on screen. So if the corner of that box is touching the line, I'll be able to use that as my object to snap, or, it shows me how big my aperture is. So I'm just going to set my aperture back to my normal size of 5. And, when I do L, it just shows me my aperture in here, how big that is on screen. It's handy to see, and, that little box is following me around. And, as I said, if you make the aperture bigger, that AP box will also increase in size. Pick box is the next one. These are registry entries also that we're going through at the moment. So these will be saved from session to session. The next entry that we'll look at is pick box. So I'll just go pick box up here. So it sets the object selection target height, and it's in pixels. So if we type pick box at the command line, I'll set it to a large number, and you'll see that when I hover around, that's our pick box, that area in here. If I change pick box back to 5, you'll see I have that little one on here. If I change it to 0, I have no pick box on screen. So I'll change that one back to 5. And you can see as I hover over the object, when it comes into contact with that pick box, that's the tolerance that we've got for picking. Next one is pick first. When you're creating objects or editing objects in AutoCAD, mostly we pick the objects and then we run the command, or we run a command and pick the objects. You might find that sometimes that you're not able to pick objects prior to running a command. That's because the pick first option has been turned off. That should be on all the time, so you can actually pick your objects prior to selecting a command. Okay, so that's our selection area we've gone through, and now we'll have a look at drafting and display. There's a few entries in here. DimmerSoc is to do with dimensions and creating associative dimensions. @rec or attribute request is when you're bringing in blocks, whether it asks for information. PlineGen, PSLT scale, field display, QText mode, fill mode, and menu bar, fairly straightforward, but we'll have a look at each of them as we come through. So I'm just going to come into my AutoCAD of DimmerSoc. Sorry, I'll go to the system variable. Easier, sorry. DimmerSoc. And you'll see that the current setting was set to 2, so it creates associative dimension objects. The others, 0 creates exploded dimensions, 1 creates non-associative dimensions. So if it's set to, actually I'll set it to 0. And I'm just going to do a dimension. Let's go home, quick dimension. And I'll actually grab a shorter line, just so it's a bit clearer. So if I dimension this line here, and I click on the objects, you will see that they're all separate objects. If DimmerSoc is set to 2, when I create a dimension this time, I'll just go dimension, I'll go the opposite side, and I'm still in the dimension command. So now it's 1 object, and if I was to modify this line here, we'll see that the dimension updates itself. This one didn't because it's not associative. It's just plain line work. So DimmerSoc, the dimensions become 1 object, and you are able to explode them if you need to. But with DimmerSoc turned on, the dimensions become a single object and you're able to manipulate those how you like. I'm just trying to find where I am on screen. At request, ATTREQ, if we just go back to Express Tools, System Variables. When you bring a block into AutoCAD and it has attributes assigned to it, sometimes you might want that block just to come in and use the standard settings. So you don't want to actually have to enter attributes or press enter to cycle through all the attributes. If this entry is turned off, set to 0, it will assume the defaults for all attributes that are attached to a block when it's inserted, and you will have no prompts to modify the attributes. You'll be able to double click on attributes and modify them once the block is inserted, but the block will be inserted. So when you insert the block, you'll specify the insertion point, you'll specify the rotation and the scale, and that will be it. If @rec is turned on, you'll be prompted for each of the attributes that are in that block after you've entered the location of the block. PlineGen controls the generation of polylines. So at the moment it's set to 1. I'm going to set it to 0. And I'm going to draw a polyline. So if I draw a polyline in here, actually I'll go model space and I'll draw a polyline here. So we can see that we've got dashes, it's putting full segments of that line in here, and it's got points at the corners. So it's running the definition of the line from vertex to vertex. If I change the setting for PlineGen, I'll change that to 1. Any polyline that I draw now, I'll do the same thing or pretty much the same thing as previously. So I'll draw a polyline. Looks to be doing the same thing, but PlineGen is turned on. And when I press enter, you'll see that each of the segments are the same length, and it doesn't necessarily correlate with the corners. So we have a corner down here, and you'll see that there's no line work here. So with PlineGen on, it will run the line type from the start of the polyline to the end of the polyline. With PlineGen off, it will generate the polyline from segment to segment and place the line type in there. Sometimes you need both. You know, you may want to leave PlineGen turned off or turned on, depending upon, you know, where you most use it. All polylines in the drawing at the moment, they won't change. However, you can change the properties of them, you know, in the normal manner. You know, just bring up properties, and there'll be a line type generation option in there, and you'll be able to modify those ones. So if I just bring up properties for a polyline, I'll just come into this one here, and we'll see that we have line type generation enabled. If I turn it off, it goes back to the end-to-end settings. Actually, this one here might be a better one to look at. So if we turn that one off, we have the full segment coming through in here. So I'll just turn that one back on. So you can access the line type generation in there, but if it's set as a system variable, any polyline that you draw will be using that setting. Next one, not everyone is familiar with, but it's one of these ones. When we have a viewport, I've got a viewport in here. That one's set at 1 to 1,000. This one here is set at 1 to 200. And we can see that we have the same area here. If I was to draw a circle just here, you'll see that that point is over here. We've got a difference in line types here. If we turn on PlineGen, we'll just go over here. Sorry, not PlineGen, PSLT scale. Sorry. It controls the scaling from viewport to viewport and into paper space. So with it turned off, I have these line types at the scale that was set in model space, whatever the line type scale was in there. If I was to set the PSLT scale to 1, click OK. If I regen all now, we find that our line types are the same in the viewports. So no matter what scale we make the viewports, the line work will be the same scale. So if I was to create another viewport, let's place one here. I'll zoom, let's pan over here. I'll zoom in. Not sure of what scale that one is, but I'll just type regen just to regenerate that one. And we'll see that we now have the line work is the same scale or same distance as the other viewports. Okay, so RM is the same distance as here. So that one is PSLT scale. Another one you'll see in here, I've got gray areas and I've got pieces of text. If I have a look at this one here, double click on it, and we can see that that's a field. So it's a field 100 times 4. So that's my field in here. Fields generally show with a background. Some people don't like them. When you print, that background on a field will not print. However, you can also turn it off in your drawing so you don't have to see the gray. That system variable is field display. And if that's set to 0, there will be no gray background on my fields. So, you know, I know this is a field, but I don't actually know that, you know, because I know this drawing, I know that's a field. And maybe not that one. Next one's a field. and that's based on that one there. So it's actually, I don't know if it's a good thing to turn off the field display or not. So I'm just going to set that back to 1, just so those grey figures, that grey comes back on. Another one, you've got a lot of text in your drawing maybe. There is a system variable called QText mode, and that will turn quick text on or turn quick text off. There's also a complementary command called QText. So if I do QText mode, I'll set it to 1. At the moment, it's set to 0. I'm going to set it to 1. And if I regen, this is good in a very large drawing that's got a lot of text. You'll see that the text appears as rectangles and it will not display and it will not regenerate until you turn QText mode turn QText mode off. However, all the pieces of text you can double click on and you can edit them, you know, any of these. I think some of them are in blocks and that, and any modifications to those pieces of text will come through when you turn QText mode back off. So change back to 0, regen, and we'll see that the text is still there. Large drawings, it's a great idea to be able to turn the text on just so it doesn't regenerate and doesn't take up memory whilst you're panning around. So that will actually speed up your operation in AutoCAD as well. The next one we have is fill mode. With civil drawings, we generally place shading in roads and things to signify whatever materials they may be, or we may have a lot of hatching, solid hatching that we can't see through, or you know, that sort of thing. If we were to turn fill mode off, so fill mode, change it to 0. With variables, 0 generally, most of them is off, 1 is on. So the ones that only take you know, a single integer, if we change them to 0, you'll see that nothing's changed here. But if I regen here, that fill has gone and it won't display on screen. The text is there. It's a background mask. That's why it's not displayed. But with any hatching, you can actually turn that off and you'll be able to pick objects underneath and be able to work on that. So, you know, sometimes just turn fill mode off or on will allow you to get into an area that you weren't able to previously or with difficulty. Rather than changing your draw order or things like that, you can actually turn your fill off. In AutoCAD previously, we had a menu bar. We still have a menu bar. With the ribbon, not all commands are on the ribbon. So if we were to change the menu bar variable or type menu bar at the command line, change it to 1, it'll actually display the menu bar up here and you'll have all the tools that are available in AutoCAD. Not just the ones that are on the ribbon, but any additional ones will be in here as well. Okay. We missed a column, Jonathan. That's okay. So we'll have a look.
My apologies.
No,
sorry,
that's all right.
No.
Yeah, that's why I got mixed up with my list here just before.
That's okay.
So I'll go back to file stuff towards the end. Actually, no, I'll go back to file settings at now. So these ones aren't actually on the PowerPoint here. We have a, with our dialog boxes, when we open a new drawing, if I type open, it brings up a dialog box. Sometimes when I type open, it comes up with a command line. That's because the CMD, DIA, sorry, no, not CMD, the file DIA system variable. I'm not even typing in there at the moment, sorry. file dia, as in file dialog. If that's set to 0 and I type open, you'll see that it's asking me for the name of the drawing to open on the command line. It can be quite difficult to explore. We can put a tilde there and that will bring up the dialog box. However, if we set the file dialog to 1, type open, that dialog box will appear at all times. And you'll notice in my sysvar earlier that that's one of those commands that I have in my list of preferred variables. The next one is cmd dia. So if I was to type plot, it brings up the dialog box here. If I type cmd dia, change that to 0, use the plot command once more. No, not plot. Hold on. I've just got to find one. Okay, if we, I'm going to, hold on, I just need to check something.
Would hatch help?
It could be. Plot used to do the same thing. I'll try hatch. Okay. Yeah, normally hatch would come up with a dialog box. And with cmd dia set to 0, the dialog box won't appear. If I set it to 1, type hatch once more, we'll now have that dialog box, I hope, somewhere. I think hold on, I've just, okay, certain commands, dim edit, queue leader, they have dialog boxes. I'm just going to do queue leader. Go okay, and that will do.
So, Sean, I guess when with that particular command, when it's running the hatching, it's the fact that the contextual ribbon doesn't appear, whereas with cmd.dia set the other way,
okay.
the contextual ribbon does basically doesn't do anything.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Just okay. cmd.dia still brings up a dialog box. So hatch. So that's changed. Okay, there are certain dialog boxes offhand I cannot place them. The plot one used to be one that I knew worked. DD insert was another one that had no. Anyway,
I think this is one of those ones where you find that you are inadvertently operating off through the command line and you don't know why the command doesn't prompt. So it's one of those ones which, at least if you know to type cmd.dia, flicking the switch on this particular one can normally be the solution that you're after.
Yeah. If you're working with files or, going out to Windows files and things like that, it's the file FILEDIA system variable. If you're not getting certain dialog boxes in AutoCAD, so AutoCAD dialog boxes, if they don't appear, it's cmd.dia. If that's set to 1, those dialog boxes will appear. Offhand, I cannot think, I've just gone blank with this one at the moment. But yeah, the dialog boxes are, that's how we get those ones back, cmd.dia. So we'll move on. Next one we're going to have a look at is font alt. We've all opened an AutoCAD drawing and we've had warnings about missing X references. We've had warnings about missing fonts and things like that. And AutoCAD will substitute any of the missing fonts with another file text font. And that substitute text font is what is specified in the font alt system variable. So when I open a drawing and it has missing fonts, it's going to use a simplex.shx file to substitute those missing fonts. I could change it to Arial. So if I have missing fonts and I open my drawing and there's missing fonts, it will replace that text on screen with the style, Arial as the text, the style, or the text font in your AutoCAD. So font alt will be able to modify or set that default text font when you open your drawing. So, you might have an ISO style that you use for drawings, or most of the drawing is using an ISO style. You could actually come in here and you could type ISO 3086 or whatever it may be in here. And that would be the font that will be used for any of the missing fonts in there. Next one is remember folders. So when we are opening AutoCAD and we are going to a job, if we set remember folders to 1, it will default to the last path used in that command. So if we were working on a project that was located on a certain place on the server and you wanted to get back into that, the next drawing you open is in that same folder, AutoCAD will go back to that same folder and present you with the file open dialog box if remember folders is turned on, which is set to 1. If it's set to 0, it will default back to the My Documents folder or Documents folder in Windows. And I don't know of a lot of people who use the Documents folder as their storage for drawings. So if remember folders is set to 1, it will default to the last directory that you've opened a drawing from. Okay, we'll move on to the next section. Any questions, Jonathan?
No. And guys, I should have said this is a.
Oh, we've almost run out of time too.
This is a slightly longer session than usual, which is fine. No, it's all good. There's a lot of good stuff that we've already seen and to come. So this will be a longer session. So if you do have to duck out, by all means do so. We'll have the recording on the YouTube channel. So go for it, Selwyn. All good.
Yeah, I didn't realize the time.
No problem. Okay,
so next one, layer control, viz retain mode, dim layer, HP layer, text layer, and XREF layer. With these ones, viz retain, when we're using reference files or referencing drawings into a current drawing, we have a system variable called viz retain. Viz retain allows you to save the modifications you make to the layer table in your current drawing. So you can change the colors of X-reference layers in your drawing, line types, any of those sort of things that are manageable in the layers panel can be modified, and they can actually be saved for the next time you open that same drawing. So if viz retain is turned on and you change any settings to your layers, be them frozen, thawed, on, off, colors, any of those sort of things, set to 1, those settings will be remembered when we come back into the drawing for the next session. We also have with viz retain turned on, we can also specify the settings that will be restored when we open our drawing. You might only want certain objects to be restored. So, we can, it's bit code, this one as well. So we add together the ones that we want to synchronize. And if it's 0, it works like it used to back in the old days. And if you use the bit codes, you can actually do certain objects. So you might only want freeze and thaw synchronized. or you only want color. So if you only want color, you put 16 up here. And then when you open that drawing that has an X reference, only the colors will be synchronized. If I was to put an entry of 6, that would signify that I'm using number 2, freeze thaw synchronized, and 2 and 4. So, and lock and unlock would be synchronized using that setting of 6. So that's 2 plus 4 equals 6. So you would just add up the entries in here. Quick and easy ones here. Dim layer is a fairly new variable, dim layer. Dim layer, if that's set to a string, so we might have a layer in our drawing called dimensions. For example, if that's set to dimensions and I create any new dimensions in my drawing, they will automatically go to the dimensions layer. We also have the same with text. So we have text layer. So that will do the same thing. If we have a layer in our drawing, we can specify that in here. So text layer. And we also have XREF layer. So any X references brought into your drawing will go onto the layer specified here. If there's no layer specified and it's set to a decimal point, it will set it to the current layer, which it states it here, current layer or C layer system variable.
So Selwyn, would it be a good thing to have these 3 that you just mentioned alone, for those of us that don't maybe have the best layer control in the world, having these variables set in the drawing template?
Yeah, and any of these variables that you know that you want, because that could set up a standard, for your office, all XREFs go on the layer XREF. It will save you making the layer XREF, and it will just place that. If the layer doesn't exist, it will create that layer and it will place the XREF on there. Same with the text, it'll create that layer for the text if need be. And same with the dimension one. There's also another one in here called HP layer. And that's our hatch layer. So all our hatching could go onto a certain layer as well. So there's actually 4 of them. You've got dim layer, HP layer, text layer, and XREF layer. Okay, that was a quickie. We'll move on to the next one. Basically, this is a fairly crucial one, really, when you're working with drawings, be them civil or whatever they may be. We might just actually have a look at here. Insert export. InsBase. InsBase specifies the insertion point of a drawing if you're going to bring it into AutoCAD. So you might draw your drawing, up somewhere, way out away from 0,0, and you want the base to be a point on that drawing. You would set the InsBase to be the point that you want in your drawing. I'll show you these ones in just a moment. Ins units is the default units to use when inserting, the insertion units setting is what the drawing is set to. So when we bring this drawing into something else, it will know that it's set to meters or whatever it may be. So what we'll have a look InsBase. So I'll just a quickie here. I'll just go into model space. I'm just going to do a rectangle. Sorry, wrong. That wasn't meant to happen. Wrong shortcut. Okay, I'll just do a rectangle. Our 0 is down here. So my 0 point is just down here. If I was to create a block out of this here, I'll just go block. I'll call it temp. Sorry, that's off screen. I'll leave these as they are. I'll select the object here. I'm leaving my base point as 0,0. Click on this. And now when I click on this, and I move it away, I can see that my base point is down here. So what I could do here is I'll edit that block and I'll type ins base and I can set it to that point there. And then when I bring that drawing in, it will reset and use that corner. Not a very good example in the block editor because it won't do what I'm after, but that's the concept of doing setting a base. So if I come out here, my base point is going to be down at 0,0 somewhere. I might have something in here and I want to use the base point of, say, this point here. If I type ins base here, that would be the base point for when I insert that drawing into another drawing. Rather than using 0,0, it'll use that point as the control point for my insertion point. Okay, ins units. Ins units specifies the, hold on, back to the Express system. All these ones are bitcode entries. Sorry, not bitcode, they're integer. So we need to just enter whatever scale this drawing would be. So this drawing would be in meters. So my ins units for this drawing would be 6 to signify that this drawing has been drawn in meters. So if I'm to insert this drawing into another drawing, that's okay, don't worry about that one. When I insert this drawing into another drawing, it knows this drawing is in meters. If my other drawing that this is coming into is in millimeters, it will scale my drawing to suit. It will also use this as the base point when it's inserted, and it will do its scaling up or down, whichever way it needs to go. The other two variables that we have in here are ins def, ins units, def target. This specifies the default if we're bringing a file into this drawing and it doesn't have a unit type set, it will use the meters conversion. So if my drawing that I come in and it comes into this drawing and it doesn't have anything set in here, it will automatically be assumed to be created in meters. The next one here is source, ins def source. And that's the same. So if the source units are set to, ins units are set to 0, this one will take effect. So basically it's the ins units, def source and def target. They're the two settings that you would need to do so you can get smooth insertions of drawings from one to the other and the correct scaling. And there you go. The last one took a few minutes and that's it, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, that was a whirlwind tour, and there was obviously a load of bonus ones chucked in there as well in relation to file. So look, we did have one question just pop up towards the end here, which was, will the, and I'm literally reading it as I've seen it, will the ins units command set the standard units for the entire drawing? For example, I set ins units to millimeters and draw a line. That line will be in millimeters, correct? Okay, so well, I suppose you're drawing at 1-to-1. So this is more about bringing content in from.
Yeah, if you're drawing in millimeters, you set your insertion units as millimeters.
Yeah. So
if you're drawing in meters, set it as meters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers that question. Then there was another one in regards to, I think, over the course of changing and creating the light and dark interface options that are in the actual options, there is apparently the layer manager, well, not apparently, but the layer manager now shows XREF layers written in a grey text as opposed to a black text. We were asking questions come about as to whether or not there's a variable to control that, which could be interesting if you know if there is one off the top of your head, or if that's controlled by a variable. The internet tends to sort of suggest that there isn't one?
I have a feeling there is.
Right. So Tim could be in luck here.
We'll have to get back to Tim about that one.
Yes.
So if you grab Tim's details,
I've got his details. That's absolutely
some research.
fine.
I have a feeling that I came across it only a few days ago.
There you go. We've got a very happy Tim now, as he's written it right.
Don't get too happy,
Q&A
Tim.
panel.
We'll see what the answer is.
Okay,
but I've got a feeling. I saw it in BricsCAD, so I assume that it'll be in AutoCAD also.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, folks, I'm going to share my screen now, Selwyn, just to finish off. So bear with me just for a second while I remove all of the content from the screen, which is things like the Q&A panel and others, and just pop on the final slide. So I was actually going to summarize what we've covered today, but as you had that literally up in a second ago, I don't see that there's any point for that. But if you do want to take a screenshot of this, folks, you can do. If not, obviously, as I've said, the recording will be available as of later this afternoon. We have a couple of, one more webcast covering June, which is Revit Fundamentals Part 2. Our colleague John Banson will be presenting that one following on from Part 1. And so if you can join us for that, you are more than welcome to. If you don't get the newsletter, you can subscribe via this particular link down here, where we will only send you emails if you choose about webcasts. So you won't get pummeled mercilessly with mailing content. This was a particularly long webcast, folks, but as you can see, it was well worth it. A lot of little nuggets of gold in there. Thank you so much, Selwyn, for giving us a lot of good content to take away. And I think many of you will probably find you can apply a lot of what Selwyn's taken or shown you guys today. So thanks for that, Selwyn.
Really appreciate it, Jonathan. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who attended. I hope you've got something out of this, even if it's just one system variable that'll help you in some way.
Yeah, nice, excellent. Thank you very much for attending, everybody. We will have the recording up at some point today, so if you want to come back and have a look at it, that'd be great. And we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at the next webinar. Thanks very much. Thanks, Selwyn.
Thank you. Bye-bye.